brought down. He's got a PA, remember, but he needs Mega. Oh, no! Delete it! Remember, I've seen one! And Cloud9, they don't give up, they don't surrender, and they take down Flash Wolves!
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Worlds Tonight. I'm Sjokz supporter, and joining me to recap Day 3 of the 2016 Worlds Group Stage are James Stress O'Leary and David Phreak Turley. Good evening, gentlemen. It was crazy today, again.
It was absolutely crazy today. Almost all the games that got played today could have gone to either of the teams. Very, very few stomps. Super close games.
So much action. Let's go right into it because there were some crazy, crazy games.
Yeah, definitely. We saw groups A, B, and D in action today, and the World's Wild Ride continued. Another handful of upsets, a broken record, and a 70-minute game. Oh my, there we see all of them, and there's a couple of them we're going to dive deeper into. So SKT, they picked up another decisive win, and C9 also got on the board, but it was close.
That was that crazy 70-minute game. The turnaround right when it looked to be a little tense. We'll get to that, I'm sure, a little bit later on in the show.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it all started with Game 1 when the LCL's Albus Noox Luna took down North America's CLG to start the day. CLG should have been heavily favored, but then
Sure.
this happened.
But the story is the gap is closing among the middle to bottom tier teams here at Worlds. Forget the word wild card. The LCL have a strong team here in Albus Noox Luna. This was a very close game. There were strategic moves back and forth that Albus Noox outplayed.
I think it was very important also to look at ANX pulling off a fairly difficult composition. The poke you would expect to see out of, fairly strategic teams, pulling it off really well against CLG.
Yeah, fantastic win for them, ANX, and the surprise didn't stop there. G2 and the ROX Tigers got back on the Rift for the first time since day 1, and G2 put up a good fight, a great fight, I should say.
Oh, it looked so great for Europe and G2 early on in this game. Great, engages you sort of expect there, but it just wasn't quite enough. ROX Tigers, if any team can hold on from that, it certainly is. Mad, this play from Smeb.
Exactly. The clip ago was a Baron steal that was game-saving. If G2 secures the Baron, Peanut said in an interview, they would have lost the game, ROX would have, and then this pursuing team fight afterwards. A comeback win for ROX Tigers.
Heartbreaking. I don't know what's worse, losing, getting stomped, or losing and knowing that you almost had it. We'll see for G2 how it turns out, but we also saw the second longest game in Worlds history following that. The Flash Wolves and Cloud9, they went back-to-back 70-minute slugfest, and T9 eventually did it.
Another incredibly close game. This one, though, was Flash Wolves doing so well for most of the game, and then Cloud9 finally getting some openings. Impact here, getting the snipe on a Maple. There were enough squishies that C9 could assassinate them.
And Impact had so much presence coming in from the side of all of these fights, just getting himself involved in. Eventually, the flanks came out from Meteos. You saw a couple. There was the first that really set this game up for C9 on this massive comeback, and you're going to see another out of nowhere, out of the Flash Wolves' own base here to end up taking the game for C9. Really good end of the performance for C9 when you look at today's games up against the Flash Wolves.
Yeah, they absolutely needed that win, even though they were not extremely happy with it, but a win is a win, and they needed it. And then that last game of the day to close it all out, Samsung Galaxy, they handed the LPL's Royal Never Give Up their first loss of the tournament.
RNG were looking so strong. Samsung, they sub in Core JJ, and along with the rest of the team, is able to take down the leaders in Group D. You can see the Skarner composition with the Rise as well. So much there to be able to take out RNG, and it wasn't quite the same performance as yesterday from the Chinese team.
And I gotta say, though, you've got to hand it to Ambition here, the jungler who waited so long to get to Worlds, played amazing on the Skarner, player of the game for sure.
Yeah, with that Trinity Force Skarner bringing it home, taking a look at the standings after 3 days of competition. 2 undefeated teams left on the board, the ROX Tigers in Group A, and then SK Telecom on top of Group B. My pickings are not going to come through. Cloud9 will probably not top that group, but we'll see what happens. And then Group C is tied, and they get back on the Rift tomorrow.
Right, so many ties for spots to get out of the group stage. It's really anyone's to still pull in. There's several rematches still to go.
Yeah, definitely. Group D is on its head. Group B is looking quite decisive, but we'll see what happens tomorrow. We'll complete the first round robin of the group stage, starting with AHQ versus INTZ, and then China's #1 EDG will face off against Europe H2K. And G2 will look for their first win as they take on Albus Noox Luna, and then it is North America CLG versus the ROX Tigers. Rather a very interesting day of games to close everything out before heading into the next week.
Gotta agree, there are a lot of really important matches. We know the fact these upsets can still happen. It's a lot of very close teams.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Now we're going to take a closer look at today's games, including TSM's comeback win versus Splice. So if you are watching in client, be sure to check out youtube.com/LOLesports for the full-length version of Worlds Tonight. Fantastic. We saw Group A for the second time today, and the teams may be a lot closer than we thought on day one. CLG, they have a little bit of a curse and a little bit of a history when it comes to taking on underdog teams, and it proved again today.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe rub a little salt into the wounds here on this one. CLG just keeps happening.
This is 3 international tournaments in a row that Counterlogic Gaming have lost to a team that qualified through a wild card qualifier. I referenced earlier that the gap is closing, and that's really the thought, is that you can no longer make fun of these Pool 3 teams. They are about as good as these other teams qualifying through. Yes, we know the Koreans are very dominant and Rox Tigers still look pretty amazing, but these matches are ones you can no longer overlook.
And, you know, we see that on individual skill as well as strategic level. Lecrit actually had a very good game on that Tom Kenshin, a great interview after showing us a little bit of personality that we've come to know from some of the top players of different regions, so maybe a player to watch there too.
I really do want to highlight Lecrit here because it's fun watching the pick ban metagame evolve. Like last year at Worlds, Darius was like 100% pick ban until week 3 when everyone stopped playing him. Here you're seeing Syndra be the most prized mid laner, and you've got Tom Kench, when piloted by an excellent player, nullifies that advantage, eat the stun target, eat the ult target, and now you just don't do any damage anymore.
No, super interesting playstyle from him, and also, as you say, great interview. They're ready to fight. They just want to fight. They just want to play and show that they're here to play. But what does it mean for CLG now? That inconsistency, and in a group stage where you're going to have to lay it all on the line.
It meant a very tense game watching straight after that G2 Rox game. If G2 had picked up that win, man, that was pressure back on CLG. But there is still some, because if CLG don't pick up the rest of their games here against G2, against Albus Noox, then it's that tense situation where you could be in a tiebreaker for that second spot out of the group.
Yeah, it just means all these teams are mortal, though. CLG have the chance of beating Rox Tigers based on seeing how Albus Noox did against them, how G2 did against them. Albus Noox the same way, can clearly pick up a win here as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that some teams do good against them in the early game specifically, and if we take a look at that G2 Rox game, which G2, of course, they didn't have the best, I think, mental coming into this. Obviously, you're taking on the #1 seed from the LCK, and then they show up and actually are in the lead for such a long time.
They found a really good way to get into the early game. Coming into this tournament, almost everyone is saying Smeb, probably the best player in the world right now, and G2 managed to win the top lane with Expect and Trick putting in work on that Gnar and Olaf. A lot of early pressure came in, but it eventually did fall apart. Of course, you're seeing the damage number there on that Smeb cannon was big.
I want to take a moment to look at Trick. He's our 2-time European MVP for the 2016 season. And finally, we saw the performance out of him at Worlds that we wanted to in today's game. The early game from Trick was insane. Going bottom lane, repeat ganking, then repeat ganking top. Brilliant performance on Olaf from him. Unfortunately, wasn't quite as monster performance as some of the Rox Tigers had, as the follow-up plays in that game were just insane.
Yeah, Smeb ultimate here on Cannon to save, well, not save the game, they were doing pretty well until then, but they turn around and they just go and decimate G2.
I mean, the goal for G2 was to get a hardcore dive, the Jhin ulti, run the Olaf in on top, give him a Karma Shield, all this, but then he finds the re-engage. It's too much damage all at once. There's no exhaust to be had. That was already used on a different target, and this is the thing, you have to bring exhaust against this Kennen. I think basically Kennen and Rumble are the 2 big top laners. Mage tops are big right now. Double mage comps are huge. You need a locket and you need an exhaust for this Kennen.
I would say it's absolutely beautiful to see, and it is, but of course totally unbiased, as hoping that the European team can at least pick up a win. Sure. That was heartbreaking, but you gotta say, as G2, you have to be able to pull the trigger. You have to be able to control that Baron area so Peanut doesn't get in for the steal. But after all, I think that as G2, you can walk away from this day with a positive feeling.
I think somewhat so, yeah. I would agree. When you look at their first day performance, the changes coming into day 2 for them, obviously day 3 of the tournament, a lot better. Not the only European team that was maybe showing some life here in today's games. We saw from the European contenders in Group D, they would take it to TSM early, but eventually North America's TSM, they picked up their 2nd win of the tournament overall, but it looked so good for Splice.
First blood for Mickey!
Oh, I know. First blood in the bottom lane, up in that one. It was really nicely done. You had some very close Baron fights. This one ended up going 3 for 3, but it was still Baron secured for Splice, and it was interesting catching this one. The sentiment was, yeah, but it's not far enough away. TSM can always outplay in the late game. That's what happened. You're seeing moments like this 40 minutes in. eventually Splice fell apart. They started getting picked off, and TSM ran away with it.
Yeah, they didn't close the deal, and we have to do our special shout out for Sjokz there. He has had a great game on Cassiopeia, the first game they played, and then here on Malzahar, absolutely terrifying. Actually, caught a glimpse of him after the match, and he looked very distraught. They knew they should have had it in the bag.
Yeah, they knew it, and we discussed a lot about Splice's late game shot calling, and it just didn't seem on point. But we heard from Doublelift after the game. He played the Jhin himself, had a decent performance, and on the other side, he was talking about how Bjergsen in the mid laner still feeling a little under the weather, perhaps a lack of a shot calling voice for TSM, but it didn't particularly show in the late game at all. Yeah. You look at it, and they look just punishing against Splice.
Phreak, what do you think of that, Jhin?
Yeah, I want to talk about Bjergsen real quick though, and then I'll get to your point. I don't.
All right.
Well, sorry, I was about to bounce off him on this one. I don't want to understate it. Like, it is a pretty big deal. Like, Bjergsen is having a hard time actually speaking right now. You had an interview with him a couple days ago in their first game. It was already rough. It's gotten worse for him, and this is actually a pretty significant deal. Thankfully for TSM, they get a full week until they play again. You have to hope for the NA fans that he does recover and it's back in, but we were seeing that first 30 minutes look very rough, and I attribute a lot of that to the fact that Bjergsen probably wasn't talking almost at all. Yes, it did get better later on. Yes, Doublelift finally found what he was supposed to do on this Jhin, to your point. Had some silly split-pushing errors where he's getting picked off, but actual mechanical execution in fights, pretty good.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. They do get some time now to recoup, but then all those games are being played in the same day, so they're going to have to show up, and especially the rematch versus RNG rather is looking very, very important for them.
Ooh, very important. Group D is super tense. It's not the only group, though, that seems to be on a knife edge.
Yeah, everything is. And tomorrow we'll see Group C get back on the stage and break the four-way 1-1 tie that's happening over there. H2K, INTZ, EDG, and AHQ. Who will be moving into the top two, you guys think, from that one?
Ooh, that's such a tense one. I really want to say EDG and H2K. I really want to, but AHQ is such an unknown factor. A little bit of a shaky game at times and wanting to play for the late game, but INTZ as well, we cannot overlook them. Handing EDG that loss on day one may very well be the tournament deciding win for this group.
I honestly do think, though, contrary to your point, AHQ and EDG are clear favorites here. Yes, INTZ had that upset win over Edward Gaming, but that was Mouse playing very stupidly. Honestly, very obvious mistakes coming out of him. And then you saw INTZ the next day, and you weren't seeing any of that. Yang and Revolta weren't nearly as big of a deal here. And I don't see EDG making those kind of catastrophic mistakes out of their top lane again this tournament. I think EDG end this group 5-1, and I think AHQ show they are a better team than H2K. I think AHQ win their match against INTZ pretty convincingly, and I think they win the rematch over H2K the next time around and just take second place pretty easily.
Yeah, because we were talking a lot about, obviously, EU that hasn't got a lot of wins on the board and any a bit inconsistent, but the LMS has also not had a great round robin so far.
They've been characteristically playing their slower style that we've seen out of the LMS teams, and for some teams, AHQ, they've been able to pick up one win from it, turning around that game against H2K to punish, but for Flash Wolves, it's been looking slow. Some people would say methodical, some people would say steady, but honestly, up against the top tier teams, it is taking them way too long to get into the game, and it's going to get punished.
Yeah, they have the Flash Wolves have that game versus SKT tomorrow. Of course, we have that MSI record, which is in their favor, and then Rox, also the other undefeated team, is taking on CLG. Do we see an upset happening here or there?
It is possible. You talked about the record that Flash Wolves has over SKT. Flash Wolves keeps beating Korean teams in the group stage at things like MSI and things like Worlds, so you can't completely count them out, but they just do not look sharp. Their mid to late game shot calling is just bad. Methodical, I think, is a bad euphemism for the fact that they're terrible at playing the late game vision control, and they're getting outplayed. They should have beaten C9. They should have won their other match as well, but they're 0-2 because they didn't deserve it in the mid to late game. As far as CLG, Rox, Tigers, yeah, Rox look mortal, but CLG don't look all that sharp.
In the early game.
I think the problem is CLG have to put an insurmountable lead to the Rox Tigers, and we haven't found what that was. G2 thought they had it today, wasn't to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we will see what happens. We'll get our answers tomorrow when the 2016 World Championships continue at 4 p.m. local time. That is 1 a.m. Central European Summer Time. Until then, we are going to go on cooldown, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on the road to the Summoners Cup. Ciao.
Expect gets caught down. He's got an EA, remember, but he needs Mega. Oh no! Delete it! Remember, I've seen one.
Okay! Nice!
And Cloud9, they don't give up, they don't surrender, and they take down Flash